guests joining us. We're just going to give it a minute or two just to let everyone log in before we get started. So we'll be right with you. Probably give it another 30 seconds or so. All right. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that we are posting a few links in the chat. Don't worry, we're going to be reviewing these later in our webinar, but we just wanted to make sure that they were available for you all as we're going to be discussing them shortly. I'm Kate McGinnis. I'm the school counselor here for students with the last names A through K.
And I'm Sarah Reeder. I'm the College and Career Readiness Counselor.
Rest assured, if your child has a last names L through Z, we do have a new counselor that's going to be joining us right after Martin Luther King Jr. Day. She's coming to us from Neshaminy with many years of high school experience as a counselor. So she'll be joining us shortly, and we're really looking forward to her arrival. But for now, we're going to start with our 10th grade future planning webinar. 1 second, sorry. All right, so first we just wanted to review with you the many options that our students have in their future. Regardless of, what a child's looking at, whether they're looking for a 4-year school, a 2-year school, trade school, military, gap years, or entering the workforce after high school, we're here to help them with their individualized needs and their goals. We encourage them to start now with planning and take full advantage of many of the opportunities that we offer here throughout the day and beyond. So we're going to be talking about those shortly. For starters, we just wanted to review some of the testing that's going to be coming up for some students, the SAT and ACT. Sorry, 1 second. Many colleges and universities are now test optional. That being said, most schools in Florida and some very selective schools are still requiring the SAT. That being said, really it goes year to year. Every time we have college rep visits that come here, they give us an update whether or not they're still test optional. Or if they're going back to making it mandated. So we do encourage students to sit for these. So we just wanted to make sure that we made reference to that. The main difference between the two tests would be the ACT feels much more curriculum based, whereas the SAT has a lot more critical thinking involved in the test. So what we have found is that students sometimes will take the SAT and ACT to see which one kind of has the better feel. And then from there, they decide which one and if they even want to do a retest. So that's the big thing. Most students take the test in either 11th grade, or after. It really has to do with math placement, whether or not they're going to take it in the fall or the spring. So there's a lot of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry on the SAT, and there's a little bit of pre-calc in it. So that's really why we determine whether or not we recommend for them to take it their 11th grade year, whether it's in the fall or the spring. And then some students do continue to or select to take it their senior year in the fall as they're applying for colleges as well. And then there's optional registration for all juniors to take the PSAT again in 11th grade to see if they are a candidate for the National Merit Eligibility. And if any student is struggling with any test taking, or test anxiety, they're encouraged to come and talk to either myself or Mrs. Rogers, the new counselor. You can also always make an appointment with Mrs. Reeder as well, the college and career counselor. But we'll talk about a lot of helpful strategies. There's also some really amazing resources on YouTube from the College Essay Guy that has to do with test anxiety. Course selection, believe it or not, is coming up. 11th grade is the final chance for our students to boost their cumulative GPA, because what happens is when they apply to colleges their senior year, they don't have their grades yet for their senior year. So really what colleges are looking at is they're looking at their grades from 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. So we do, ask students to take that in mind when they're doing their course selection so that they can be the most successful in the classes that they select to take. We do have weighted GPA. So for students who are taking honors level classes, it's on a 4.5 scale. Academic classes are a 4-point scale, and then the AP classes are at a 5-point scale. We will have a mandatory AP presentation later this month for all students in grades 9 through 11 who are interested in taking an AP class. We do a review of what the AP courses that we have, what they are offered, how many hours of homework are involved, what the actual AP assessment looks like in each topic in each course. And we really try to hone in on making sure that students are picking classes for next year while they consider their extracurricular commitments. So, whether or not they do sports, if they're in some clubs and organizations here, if they're looking at doing part-time employment next year, we just want to make sure that they take into consider the right amount of rigor for their schedule next year and not to overload them. I always give the same example to them, but to say that they're taking 3 AP classes doesn't mean anything. It really has to do with how they do in the classes that they're selecting. So there might be students who take 3 AP classes next year who actually have a lower GPA than a student who took all academic classes. So we just want to make sure, that they're aware of that. We have students that are still considering taking MBIT. That's always available. And if they're ready to begin their career specific training now. If any student has any questions after we have our mandatory presentation on AP classes, we also really encourage them to speak with any AP teachers. They're happy to help to speak with them during lunch and learn blocks or before or after school if they want a little bit more information about the AP course before they actually select that for next year. And then the last thing we just wanted to mention about course selection is that most colleges require a minimum of 2 years of the same world language in high school. 3 are encouraged, and some schools will, if it's a highly selective school, they will want to see 3 years of the same world language. And just for all of your, for your reference, Spanish 4 and French 4 are honors level courses, so they're weighted. So there's that. We also just wanted to talk a little bit more about how to stand out, and it really starts now with students who are in 10th grade and as they're approaching their junior year. They really want to work on to identify their hook, what their passion is, what they could use to really highlight themselves in their application. And Mrs. Reader actually offers a lot of sessions over the summer before their senior year as well to help with like the college essay. And so that's another opportunity for them to really kind of highlight that in their essay, but right now they have the opportunity to be working on like the things that they're really passionate about. They should be elevating their interests and hobbies. This also allows for opportunities for leadership. So for our 10th graders who might join some extracurricular, opportunities, maybe they're part of, the student council, or they're part of, I'm trying to think, Key Club with Mrs. Reader. I am part of the Multicultural Club. If they're involved in it early on in their freshman and sophomore year, then what happens is, it kind of lends itself to more leadership opportunities as they go through high school. And then obviously the community connection, there's a ton of volunteer work, there's employment, and other things like that. We encourage students to think outside the box. Sometimes they might identify a need in the community or the school or, even their home and figure out ways to fill it. So I've been in awe of students who, found passions and ways of, I know 2 students who started a nonprofit organization, and they will actually have students who are dance students who kind of, I guess, they age out of different material and they donate it to children in need who may not be able to have some of that dance equipment without those the volunteer and those donations. So it's really cool to see a lot of our high school students here at New Hope-Solebury who think outside the box and find solutions to a lot of issues. And then obviously creating strong connections with your teachers, counselors, and employers. Before they know it, they're going to be asking their teachers for letters of recommendation before they leave as juniors. So now's the time that they're making the connections. Maybe it's a classroom teacher that they love asking questions to, or someone who they've just really connected with. And as counselors, we will write a letter for every single senior. So we're continuing to, build connections and rapport with our students so that we can highlight them and write a glowing letter recommendation for them their senior year.
So another thing that students can do to really supplement their extracurriculars is to do something meaningful during the summer months. So this can look a lot of different ways. It can look like a part-time job. It can be community service, travel. One thing that we wanted to highlight was pre-college programs. There are a lot of colleges that offer opportunities for students to come and live on campus, experience life in a dorm, in a dining hall, and in a college classroom with professors, where they get to explore different interests and potential majors for the future. This is not something that is required by any means, but it's something that a lot of students find a lot of joy in, and they really benefit from it. So if you're interested in exploring that, we do have a Canvas module that has examples. It is not an exhaustive list, but it does have a lot of examples of pre-college programs. That is in the college and career portfolio class in Canvas that your child has access to. There's also a National Summer Program fair in Philadelphia later this month on January 29th. And I did put the link to that in the chat if you're interested in checking that out as a family. That is on an evening on January 29th. One other thing that we would recommend is just keep a Google Doc of everything that the student does, all extracurriculars, all leadership, all community service. They do have a resume that they created in 9th grade, and it will be updated in the school in 11th grade as well. But in the meantime, you can always just stick things into a Google Doc, because you'd be amazed at all the things that get forgotten on college applications in 12th grade for things that happened back in 9th or 10th grade. Okay, next slide. All right, so the Career Pathways program, all of our 10th graders are currently in a pathway. They chose one of 3 pathways: arts and humanities, business and communications, or health sciences, STEAM, and innovation. What that means is that they get more targeted resources. When we have a guest speaker, we can send an email to everyone in that specific pathway. When we have a field trip coming up, we can send that to the people in that specific pathway. But they are not limited to that pathway by any means. So we've had 2 pathway days so far this year. We have 2 more coming up, and students are allowed to choose any of the guest speakers to attend on those pathway days. They're not limited to the ones in their specific pathway, but we're finding that students are really taking advantage of those guest speakers that we have, and hopefully they will all be attending the career fair that we have coming up on February 6th, so that they can really chat with a lot of different professionals from their specific pathway, because it's helping them to identify their short-term goals, but also to identify more long-term goals and think outside the box a little bit in terms of careers that they may never have considered prior. We also wanted to mention that in addition to the career speakers and all of that, in junior year, they will have some other exciting opportunities coming up. So they'll all participate in mock interview day as juniors. More information will come out next year for that. And then they can also participate in RISE as a junior. That's a 20-hour job shadow that they do outside of the school day, and that can go on their transcript. So that's an optional program, RISE is, and it's to lead up to APEX in senior year, which, as many of you probably are aware, is a 60-hour internship that we release students from school to participate in. So lots of exciting stuff coming up, but we definitely encourage our 10th graders to take advantage of these career experiences this year as well. Next slide. All right. So the college search, all the 10th graders have access to a website called SCORE. It is linked on the high school website, and they have a college search function. They offer virtual tours, and they allow you to connect with schools, and they post information about upcoming open houses and things like that. We would definitely encourage students to start checking that site out if they're ready to get started with their college search. We also really encourage students to start their college visits in their sophomore year if they haven't already done so. We want them to start to sample a variety of types of schools so that they can understand the difference between a large school versus a small school, or a suburban school versus a rural school versus an urban school. Those are the kinds of things that our 10th graders should be working on now. We have definitely noticed a trend recently that a lot of students are not doing as many college visits, and they're choosing to apply to colleges before they do the visit and then only visit if they are accepted. This is kind of a troubling trend. We understand why it's happening because sometimes you're applying to schools far away and it's not easy to get there, and that makes sense. However, the best way to understand, whether a school's a good fit is to really be on that campus and experience that atmosphere. So what we would encourage our 10th graders to do is get started with some of those, even if it's not schools that are necessarily on their own list yet, to just get a sense of what the parameters are that they're looking for. And that really helps them to motivate them in school as well, because it gives them encouragement to keep working hard so that they know exactly what they're working for. Next fall, we will have a lot of college representatives, as we always do, visit New Hope-Solebury, and we would definitely encourage all of the current 10th graders to start attending those visits. Some of them actually attended them this year as well, but that's a great way to get to know some of the colleges. And then they will also have their individual college meeting next year as well. Go ahead. All right. So I just touched on the college visits, but the one other thing that I wanted to say on that is that there is something called demonstrated interest in the application procedures for some, not all colleges. Specifically, smaller and medium colleges or private institutions, they're more likely to consider demonstrated interest as part of the admissions process. What that means is that they want to admit people who are very interested in actually attending and are likely to accept their offer of admission. So doing an official visit where you take a tour and the admissions office knows that you're there, can actually be helpful in the admissions process. Same thing with when we have college representatives come here, especially we have schools, coming from far away, to come and meet with our students here. If your child is interested in that school, they should absolutely take the time to come and meet with them, because that all speaks to their demonstrated interest. All right, so a few of the criteria that they will be looking at for college admissions. First of all, it really is a wide variety of factors. It's not going to be just one specific thing. The transcript and the grades are definitely the most significant component. And they do look very carefully at grades from 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade, and then they do get their senior year grades as well. Some majors are more selective than others. Nursing and engineering are definitely very selective. Business can also be very selective. So just be aware of that. And if a student is going into one of those programs, they're going to be looking a lot more carefully at grades in math and science. Extracurriculars and leadership is definitely part of the application process. The letters of recommendation and the application and college essay, those are all really important because they let some of the students' personality come out. So we will be working a lot on that with students at the end of their 11th grade year and the beginning of their 12th grade year. And then we also wanted to mention something called institutional priorities. What that means is that every year, each college has their own institutional priorities. Sometimes it's based on a mission statement, sometimes it's based on admissions trends that they've noticed, or it could be even something as simple as like they have a really great jazz band, but they need a new drummer for it, or they have an amazing soccer team, but their goalie just graduated. Those are considered institutional priorities. The problem or the challenge with institutional priorities is that they are very unpredictable and they are not very transparent typically. So we don't know what they are from year to year, which is why we tell students do everything within their power. And then at some point, let it go. Know that they've done the best that they can do, and there might be some things that are out of their control, but so all they can do is focus on the things that they do have control over, their own extracurriculars, their own academics, and then really focus on having a great college list that has a lot of different options on it, all of schools that they would really love and be happy to go to. So, for our student athletes, if your child is planning or hoping to participate in collegiate athletics, their coach, especially club coaches, if they play for a club team, and our athletic director can be great resources. You will want to register with the eligibility website. I put that in the chat as well. Just know that every sport has a different timeline for when student athletes can do official visits with coaches. And please let us know if this is your goal. The recruitment process is a parallel process to the admissions process, which means that a lot of times it's actually what's driving the admissions process. But sometimes you might be getting conflicting information from a coach and the admissions counselor. We can be the gap, the bridge between those two gaps. So please let us help you out with that process. One thing that we do want all students to know is that students still have to be admissible to a school, even if they're being recruited for athletics. So, if the coach from Harvard is recruiting, a student, but they have a 2.5 GPA, we know that that student is probably not academically admissible to Harvard University. The coach may or may not be giving some false information. So just be careful. Usually coaches are really great about knowing if a student is academically admissible or not. But if you're ever getting information that seems a little bit odd, use us and we can always try to walk you through that process a little bit. We're happy to support that. Okay, the cost of college is obviously something that's probably on everyone's minds right now, too. We wanted to let you know that every college and university is required to have something called the net price calculator somewhere on their website. That is a website that allows you to enter some very basic financial information, and then you can see what the actual price of that college would likely be for your family, as opposed to just the sticker price that is listed, on their website. It is just an estimate, but it can be a good way of just seeing if a school would even be a feasible option or not. We also wanted to share a really great website called My Smart Borrowing. This takes the net price calculator one step further, and it allows students to see what their actual budget would be after graduating with certain loans. And so this can be extremely useful, especially as a student gets a little farther in the process and has specific schools in mind, because they can see like, okay, this school is, this much money, and these are the loans that I'll probably have to take out. So after I graduate, that would equate to how many hundreds of dollars of a loan payment, every month. So that can be really helpful, and it can be empowering for students to get to see, and gives them a better understanding of what those tuition bills are going to do for them, long term in the future. All right. So that actually wraps it up. We're sure that there's probably going to be some questions, so you can go ahead and enter those in the chat right now. You're obviously always welcome to reach out to us afterwards too. Our email addresses are there. We did include Mrs. Rogers' email address. She does not start until January 21st, but when she does, she's going to be ready to hit the ground running with the second half of the alphabet. So we'll give everybody a minute or two to enter any questions into the chat. But thank you all so much for joining us today.
We have a question about whether or not we offer, the question is, do you ever offer suggestions on colleges that students may not know or have not heard of? Absolutely. So we have one-on-one meetings with students when they're juniors, and that's when we go over, their courses and what classes and credits they still need to graduate. But the majority of our one-to-one meeting is showing them and teaching them how to kind of shop for their future. So what we do is we start kind of gathering information about some of those parameters. So maybe, location of school, size of school, possible majors, if there's any extracurriculars or resources that they know that that they want the school to have. Maybe they want to make sure that they have study abroad programs or ROTC. And then from there, we teach them how to shop online and kind of take into account schools that they may not have heard of. So as Mrs. Reeder had mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're so lucky that there are so many phenomenal schools locally, but there are really so many, throughout our country and even international. So local trends recently, we've had some students that have been looking to go, to Europe and also Canada as well. So we're happy to help, navigate that process with them. And then after the meeting, what we do is we sit down and look really at the detailed information that each and every single student submitted to us and discussed with us. And then based on the major that they had said that they are interested in pursuing, we'll make recommendations of schools that were not on their original list that they may want to consider. So that's definitely something that we love. It's one of my favorite parts of the year, actually, is doing those junior meetings and helping students with that.
And sometimes we feel like we're like begging students to consider schools that they haven't already heard of. This is a very common, thing in college admissions where students tend to have heard of a lot of the big name schools and assume that if they haven't heard of it, then it's not a great school. We really try to, combat that and help them to explore schools that maybe they haven't thought about. A really great resource is a website and a book called Colleges That Change Lives. That might be a great resource if you're interested in thinking beyond, some of those big name schools.
The
Um,
other question,
oh, go ahead.
Mrs. Reeder, that you had mentioned that I read was where you go is not who you'll be. That was really, I thought, like so helpful because it gave a lot of information, both like from people who went to, highly selective, very recognizable schools, and then schools that maybe you hadn't heard of, and the different vast experiences of, having connections with professors, the amount of research that they were able to do and conduct. So those are really two amazing resources that Mrs. Reeder and I just shared, whether it's through that podcast website or the book.
There was another question. Can a student take the PSAT and SAT in the fall to try to qualify for national merit? So yes, so the PSAT in junior year is what could qualify a student for national merit. National merit scholarships typically go to students who are in the top 1 to 2% nationwide of PSAT testers in their junior year. So depending on how they did this year, we would definitely recommend that a student give that a shot and take the PSAT next year again. We often have students sit for the PSAT in October and then they're taking the SAT in November or December. So that's absolutely fine. It's whatever timing works out for them is fine. And then there was another question about when do the one-to-one meetings happen? That usually happens in the winter of their junior year. That being said, we're here now. So we're here all the time. So if a student is excited about this process and is ready to start talking through this process, they can absolutely make an appointment with either of us right now and start to talk through some of that too.
The next question is if there's a class that juniors can take. So there's a couple things that we just wanted to mention. Mrs. Reeder offers essay workshops over the summer between their junior and senior year, and she always offers it like in July and in August. She also offers workshops on just like the application process for the rising seniors. That being said, I know Mrs. Reeder had mentioned keeping kind of a Google Doc of their extracurriculars and things like that. I also would suggest students keeping track of like a Google Doc when they're visiting schools. That being said, they might start taking notes of things that they're looking at when they're like, that they either rule in or rule out things that they like about the schools. And also, I will say if you go on college visits, and I've been on many, in a short amount of time, so maybe I've been to 5 college campuses in the matter of 3 days, and you do think you're going to remember the differences between 2 or 3, but they really do start blending together. But when students keep a Google Doc with some of the colleges that they visited, it will also or could help with their supplemental essays. Because a lot of times, there's a main essay that has to do with them and the big picture, but the supplemental essays really are asking them to tell them, why they want to go to that school. So I know Boston College came and visited us and our students, and they, one of the questions had to do with the essay, and they said they really wanted to be specific about why you want to go to that school. So for example, in the supplemental essay, and you say to, Boston College that you want to go to Boston College because you want to go to, baseball games. Her response to that is you can go to any college in the Boston area and go to baseball games. So when you're looking at those supplemental essays, when you take those tours or you do some more research and you dive into some of the websites, you can also follow schools' social media accounts, whether it's on Instagram and things like that. And it can help you with supplemental essays because you could be very specific about professors or programs or research that the institution has actually put out. So it shows that you've done a lot of work and that you see yourself there for that reason. Anything else to add with that, Mrs. Reader?
Well, just the going back to the original question about the is there a class that students take in their junior year to prepare for some of that? In their English class in junior year, I come in the spring and introduce them to some of that college essay writing. Last year, Mrs. Sanders did a great job of giving them some time to work through some of those processes, and I did some brainstorming activities with them within their English class so that everybody left junior year having that, that part of it done. And then anyone who wanted to come in for additional work throughout the summer was able to do that too.
In addition to that, a school counselor will write a letter of recommendation for every single senior who's applying to a four-year school. So we have something called a brag sheet where it has about 12 to 13 questions where we ask students to consider, they want anything that they want us to include in our letter of recommendation. So we also will push into your English class in 11th grade and discuss what the brag sheet is and what questions are in it. I am doing my junior meetings currently. I'm almost all finished those, but I'm also emailing the brag sheet to my juniors now. I'm almost giving them the test before, they actually get before they get the instruction so that they can take a look at what are the questions I'm going to ask them at the end of the year. So it might be things like what extracurriculars that they've been involved in, any leadership opportunities inside or outside of school, what's their favorite class been and why, what are they looking forward to learning in school, majors, if they've had any setbacks that they want me to discuss, as a student or an individual. So there's a lot of good questions on that as well that they'll have access to that's going to help Mrs. Rogers, Mrs. Reader, and myself write their letters of recommendation. And we start those as early as their summer of their going into their senior year.
There is a question, do SAT and ACT scores both get automatically sent to schools, or can we choose the best score to send? So the vast majority of schools offer score choice, which means that you can just send whatever you want to send. And if you choose not to send it, then they will never see those scores at all. There are a few very, very selective schools like Georgetown, University of Pennsylvania. They ask students to send all test scores that they've taken. They really just want to make sure they didn't take the test like 10 different times and never see any growth in it and anything along those lines. But the vast majority of schools allow you to just send whatever you want to send.
Great question about how many letters of recommendation students need to send. So when they're in either Naviance or SCORE, when each school in Common App, it'll tell you how many that they are required, their minimum and their max. I will say it is very rare for me not to write a letter of recommendation for a student, because usually if they're applying to 8 schools, even if 2 of them don't need a counselor letter of recommendation, the other 6 do. So, most schools will require at least one counselor recommendation and at least one teacher. And then there's other times where, they ask maybe a coach or someone who works outside of school or with volunteer work to write a letter of recommendation. They can supplement that as well.
Okay, this is a great question. Is there a parent intro to Naviance or SCORE? Do we have access to our students' accounts? So stay tuned. We are hoping to be rolling out information specific to SCORE. That is that's the tool that we think that we're going to be using for this specific grade level. So we will be pushing all of that out. There will be a parent access to that. The students already have access to SCORE, but over the summer, we're hoping to transition so that we can make sure that the parents have an account as well. The nice thing about SCORE is that you as parents will be able to suggest schools to your child, and then we can see that on our end, and we can also make suggestions within SCORE that you'll be able to see as well. So hopefully that transition will happen, over the summer so we can get you a little bit more access to that website. These were really great questions. I don't see any more right now. Obviously, you are always welcome to reach out to us if anything pops up in the future. We are very excited to continue to work with you and with your children for the next few years. This is definitely an exciting time. 10th grade is, still a time of exploration and just really making sure that students get to experience, all of high school and also start thinking more about their future. So we are happy to be with you along for the ride. And please reach out if we can do anything to support you or your child. All right, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.